Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
You're doing great work, but we've decided to take the team in a new direction. That's the line that stuck in my head, echoing like a bad chorus as I stood in front of Kevin Lang's glass office, holding a cardboard box filled with 13 years of my professional life. Framed certificates, a few old notebooks, the sad little succulent that somehow survived 6 desk moves, and a coffee mug that said, "I fix what you break." Kevin didn't even make eye contact when he said it. HR was sitting next to him with that tight, professional smile, like she was moderating a parent-teacher conference, and not helping throw someone out the door who had just pulled off the biggest win in the department's history. 2 weeks earlier, I had saved Kevin's job, and he knew it. We'd been chasing the Hallister account for 6 months. Hallister was this massive medical device firm, big money, huge potential, but notoriously picky about who they worked with. I'd led every pitch, revised every deck, massaged every scope doc. I knew their business better than they did. Kevin, as usual, hovered in the background until it was time to put on the suit and smile during the final call. I did the hard part, the late nights, the research, the 50 back-and-forth emails on compliance language. When we landed it, Kevin practically tackled me in the hallway. He even bought pizza for the team, which, for Kevin, was like giving up a kidney. I should have known right then something was off. He started looping me out of follow-ups, told the team I'd be focusing more on internal process stuff, and suddenly I was being CC'd on emails about document formatting instead of strategy. I thought maybe he was just stepping up now that we'd gotten the deal. Nope, he was prepping his move. So now here I was in that humiliating little HR ambush, listening to Kevin explain how the organization is flattening, and we're adjusting roles to meet evolving business needs. All carefully rehearsed garbage. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, thanked them, and asked if I could take my mug. Kevin laughed like we were still friends and said, "Of course, man. No hard feelings, right?" No hard feelings. That's rich. On my way out, I passed the whiteboard in the team room. Someone had erased the quarterly KPIs, and in faint marker you could still see my name next to the Hallister numbers. 146% over goal. And just like that, I was gone. I didn't even tell my wife right away. I couldn't. We'd just refinanced the house last fall. Our daughter was about to start college. I sat in the car for an hour outside a Starbucks, pretending to be on a conference call. I felt like someone had scooped out my insides with a spoon. 13 years, and he cut me loose the minute I made him look good. I wasn't surprised. Not really. Kevin was one of those guys who could sell water to a drowning man. Always smiling, always networking, always making deals at happy hour while the rest of us were cleaning up the mess. He rose fast, too fast. The higher-ups loved him. He looked the part, said all the right buzzwords, knew how to show just enough enthusiasm to make people think he was doing something without ever actually doing anything. Me, I was the guy who got results, quietly, efficiently, maybe too quietly. And now, suddenly, I was expendable. Over 50, maybe a little too direct in meetings, not exactly startup energy. Kevin had laid the groundwork for this. He'd been rewriting the story for months, pushing me to the background. "Let's let some of the younger guys lead this one," he'd say. "Take a break? You've earned it." Meanwhile, he was rewording my proposals and presenting them like they were his own. The Hallister pitch? My outline, my analysis, my roadmap. He changed the font and read it out loud. I knew I should have raised hell. I should have gone over his head. But the truth is, I was tired. Tired of corporate theater. Tired of pretending loyalty mattered. So I didn't fight. I let Kevin smile his way into a promotion, let him print out my work and staple his name to it. But I didn't forget. See, Kevin thought he'd won. Thought I was just another old guy who couldn't keep up, who'd quietly disappear into the background like so many others before me. But what he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that Hallister didn't sign with the company because of him. They signed because of me, and pretty soon they'd be calling. So tell me, what would you do if your boss stabbed you in the back like this? Would you fight it, or would you wait and watch him burn from the top, long before Kevin Lang fired me with a grin on his face and a corporate buzzword salad in his mouth. I should have seen it coming. The writing wasn't just on the wall. It was practically spray-painted across every department memo and management shuffle. But when you've been at a place for over a decade, when you've poured your best years into keeping a team afloat through hiring freezes, budget cuts, and leadership fads that change with the wind, you tend to miss the slow, creeping erosion of your value. Not because you're blind, but because you're tired. That kind of tired that lives in your bones and makes you second guess whether speaking up is worth the fallout. When I joined the company, it wasn't some trendy startup with bean bags and kombucha taps. It was a legacy firm with dust in the corners and systems that ran on duct tape and prayer. I was brought in to modernize our operations team, back when cloud migration sounded like something from a sci-fi movie, and our CRM system was essentially a glorified spreadsheet managed by Susan from accounting. I stayed late. I learned new systems before anyone else. I made myself the guy people came to when things broke. If something hit the fan, they'd say, "Ask Dan, he'll know." I took pride in that. Then came the slow shift. At first, it was subtle. A new director with a background in agile methodologies and cross-functional synergy came in and decided everyone needed to think leaner. Suddenly, titles got blurrier, job descriptions vanished, and performance reviews became these vague, feel-good conversations about value creation instead of actual results. I adapted. I read the books. I smiled through the workshops where they told us to fail fast and embrace disruption. Meanwhile, I kept the damn lights on, and then Kevin Lang showed up. Kevin was one of those guys who could sell sand in a desert and convince you it was your idea to buy it. He had perfect teeth, an MBA, and a LinkedIn profile that read like a TED Talk outline. From day one, he had his eyes on leadership. Not team-building leadership, I mean the kind with bonuses and corner offices and other people to blame when things went south. He was smooth, charismatic, and never missed a chance to repeat what someone else had said, just louder, with better pacing. At first, I didn't mind him. He stayed out of my way, let me do my thing, and mostly focused on managing up. But then he started streamlining communication. That meant removing me from email threads I used to lead. Then came the meeting invites where I was suddenly marked as optional. I'd get pulled into side conversations where he'd say things like, "We need to showcase the team's versatility," which translated from Kevinese meant, "I'm giving your responsibilities to someone else." The real blow came 6 months before the firing, when I was passed over for a project lead role I'd practically built from scratch. I didn't even get an interview. The role went to a kid named Tyler, fresh out of business school, who knew how to animate PowerPoints and talk about market positioning like he'd invented the concept. Tyler reported directly to Kevin. I was asked to support where needed. Still, I put my head down and did the work. That's what you do when you've got a mortgage, a kid about to hit freshman orientation, and a back that twinges every time you try to relive your high school basketball glory days. I wasn't chasing titles. I wanted stability, a paycheck that cleared on time, and maybe a little respect for the years I'd put in. But respect, and it turned out, had an expiration date, and mine was apparently up. The Hallister pitch should have changed everything. It was the biggest opportunity we'd had in years, and while Kevin gave the presentation, I built every inch of the architecture behind it. Late nights, early mornings, calls with procurement at 7 a.m. because they were on the East Coast. I did all of it. Kevin would drop in for 5 minutes, toss out a buzzword, then vanish. But when we landed the deal, the applause was for him. He was already shaking hands with executives, talking about expansion, leaving me behind to compile the post-sale documentation. Looking back, it was a chess move. He needed the win. He needed it to look like his win. And once he had it, I was just another pawn to be swept off the board before I got too much credit. So when the call came to talk about my future, I wasn't shocked. I was just numb. What really stung, more than the job, more than the politics, was realizing how disposable loyalty had become. I used to think staying with a company, working through the ugly years, fixing what was broken instead of jumping ship, meant something. that it bought you a little grace, but in Kevin's world, grace was weakness. Efficiency was expendable. And experience? Experience was just a polite way of saying, too old to train, but too slow to promote. I walked out of that building like a ghost. I nodded to security. I didn't look back at the glass doors or the plaque on the wall with the company motto that now sounded like a cruel joke. Innovate, collaborate, elevate. Elevate who, exactly? That night, I sat in my garage with a beer I didn't taste, staring at my old laptop and wondering if all those years of solving other people's problems had left me any energy to solve my own. But deep down, I already knew the answer, because somewhere out there, Kevin was celebrating, probably on a rooftop bar, telling some executive about the strategy he'd spearheaded, soaking in praise that wasn't his, and for now, I'd let him enjoy it. I'd let him climb a little higher. But I wasn't going away. I knew the clients, I knew the systems, I knew the cracks in his story, and I knew, sooner or later, they'd start calling. It started with a voicemail, just a simple, pleasant, professional message from one of Hallister's project leads, Amanda Hill, someone I had worked with closely during the pitch and onboarding process. She thanked me for the foundational roadmap I'd built, asked if I could clarify a few items in the implementation timeline, and mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she hadn't been able to get a straight answer from the new guy in charge. She didn't say Kevin's name, but she didn't have to. I sat there for a moment, listening to the message again, twice, not because I missed anything, but because hearing it made something deep in my chest loosen just a little. After weeks of feeling erased, someone had remembered. I didn't call her back right away. Instead, I opened my old notes. Yes, I had kept backups, because when you've been around the block as many times as I have, you learn that cover your ass is not a tactic, it's a lifestyle. And reviewed the project. Every deadline, every dependency, every challenge Hallister had flagged was still crystal clear in my head. I had built that thing from the ground up. Kevin had probably skimmed it on a plane. By the time I finally called Amanda back, from my personal number, obviously, because I was no longer officially with the company, her tone changed immediately. Warm, familiar, relieved. I answered her questions quickly, efficiently, and without any corporate fluff, which she clearly appreciated. She paused at the end of the call and said, "I'm really glad you picked up. We're a bit confused about who's running point over there." That confusion, as it turned out, was contagious. Over the next few days, I started getting LinkedIn messages, random texts, and even one very awkward email that was clearly meant for Kevin, but was addressed to me, because apparently someone on their side had saved my contact as primary. One by one, clients began to ask questions that Kevin wasn't equipped to answer. Not because he was dumb, Kevin was far from dumb, but because he was a surface-level operator in a job that required depth. Hallister didn't want someone who knew how to manage up. They wanted someone who remembered the specific detail about how their licensing structure was different in Canada versus the US. They wanted someone who could explain why the rollout dates needed to be staggered by market. They wanted someone who had done the work. Meanwhile, Kevin was out there doing his victory lap. Word around the grapevine, and yes, I still had people feeding me scraps from the inside, was that he had used the Hallister win to push for a regional leadership role. He started sitting in on global planning meetings. He hired a project manager to own delivery execution, which, translated, meant someone to plug the holes in the ship he hadn't realized was already taking on water. But the clients noticed. They noticed the lag. They noticed the vague responses. They noticed the drop in quality, in speed, in competence. And they started getting nervous. I got a call one afternoon from a senior exec at Hallister. This wasn't a friendly catch-up. This was a calculated, direct conversation. He asked me, flat out, if I was working elsewhere. I told him no, not yet. He asked if I would be open to consulting independently. I hesitated, not because I didn't want the work, but because I was still trying to figure out what revenge should look like. Was it loud and dramatic? Was it about legal action, public exposure? But as he kept talking, calmly, professionally, it hit me. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. This was about proof. Proof that I had never needed the title, the company, or the Kevin Langs of the world to deliver value. So I said yes, quietly and carefully. I didn't poach. I didn't pitch. I didn't email anyone under contract or violate any NDA. All I did was answer the phone when it rang, and suddenly I was back in business. Not corporate Dan with a badge and a lanyard, but the version of me that had built a reputation on doing things the right way, on being steady, calm, competent. The kind of guy who remembers where all the skeletons are because he buried most of them himself while everyone else was out getting drinks. Kevin, of course, didn't notice right away. He was too busy climbing. But the murmurs began. He sent out a department-wide email congratulating the team on strong client retention metrics. And someone, I won't say who, replied all with a screenshot of my LinkedIn profile, now updated to Independent Consultant Strategic Ops. That email mysteriously disappeared within 5 minutes. I got a copy anyway. One afternoon, I got a panicked call from someone still inside the company, a senior analyst who used to be under my wing. She told me Kevin had gone into a tailspin after learning that Hallister had shifted several key deliverables to external support. She said he kept saying, "We can't lose this client, not this one." Apparently, he had no idea how thin his credibility actually was. The execs had already started questioning his leadership. Rumors of underperformance, of disorganization, of arrogance, they were trickling up. I wasn't celebrating. Not exactly. I wasn't the kind of guy to cheer when someone else stumbled, even someone like Kevin. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good, not just to be needed, but to be seen again. For a while, I thought I was obsolete, thought maybe they were right, that I was too old school, too stubborn, too analog for the new way of doing business. But the truth is, competence never goes out of style. Kevin was learning that the hard way. You can bluff your way into a position, charm your way through a few meetings, and ride the coattails of someone else's work. But when the spotlight stays on you for long enough, people start to notice the gaps. And when the clients start calling the guy who doesn't even work there anymore, that spotlight gets real hot, real fast. And here's the best part. I still hadn't made a move. Not really. I hadn't called a lawyer. I hadn't written a LinkedIn post dragging anyone by name. I hadn't even corrected the story about why I left. I was just sitting quietly, doing what I'd always done, solving problems, building trust, delivering results. But now I was doing it on my terms. And Kevin? He was about to realize that the higher you climb on a stolen ladder, the faster you fall when it snaps. By the end of that month, I had signed 3 clients. All 3 had originally come through the company Kevin now led, and all 3 had quietly, carefully reached out to me with the same uneasy tone in their voices. The kind of tone people use when they're not trying to stir up trouble, but can no longer afford to sit around and hope someone else figures it out. What they needed wasn't drama or politics. They needed work to get done. They needed things to move forward without the endless cycle of PowerPoint decks, vague promises, and management buzzwords. And most of all, they needed someone who actually understood what they were paying for. Someone who had been there when the groundwork was laid. I didn't go out and build some revenge-fueled empire overnight. I didn't throw together a shiny startup or spend nights sketching out business plans in a garage. What I did was simple. I answered the calls. I said yes to work that made sense. I pulled in people I trusted, people like Monica, one of the most methodical project leads I had ever worked with, who Kevin had once told to let the younger team take it from here right before they drove her off the roster. And Ryan, a quiet data analyst, who had more technical talent in his left hand than most of the department combined, but had been passed over twice for promotion because he wasn't leadership material. I didn't poach them. I didn't chase them. I just reached out and said, "I've got a thing I'm starting. If you're interested, let's talk." And they came. Not for the money, not for revenge, but for the chance to build something that didn't treat them like disposable parts. We didn't have an office. We had a Slack channel, a shared drive, and the kind of camaraderie you only get from people who've been through the same kind of corporate nonsense and come out the other side tired, but not bitter. We didn't need to be flashy. The work spoke for itself, and the clients, once they saw that we were still the same people behind the curtain, still solving the same problems, only now without a dozen layers of red tape and executive meddling, they followed, quietly, efficiently. The first official project we took on was a diagnostics software rollout that Kevin had somehow let sit in backlog for weeks while he prioritized executive visibility. That's not speculation. That's a direct quote from an email I got forwarded by mistake. The client, a mid-size health tech company that needed everything ready by Q3, was already 6 weeks behind schedule. We picked it up, rebuilt the timeline, and had a pilot running in less than 10 days. They didn't ask for a refund from the original contract. They didn't argue. They just paid us again. Happily. I heard through one of my sources, an intern-turned account manager who owed me a few favors, that Kevin was starting to panic. He'd put together an emergency retention task force and was scheduling back-to-back calls with every client still on the books. One of them apparently told him flat out, "We're going with Dan, no hard feelings." Kevin tried to bluff through it, even tossed around some legal jargon about non-compete clauses and contract violations. But the thing is, he didn't actually read the original contracts. I did. I wrote most of them. I knew exactly what was enforceable and what wasn't. I hadn't crossed a single line. He was unraveling, and for the first time in years, I was breathing easy. There's something incredibly satisfying, not angry, not vengeful, just satisfying, about watching a man fall under the weight of his own arrogance. He wasn't a bad person, not in the capital V villain kind of way. He was just the kind of guy who thought the finish line was something you could jump to with a well-timed presentation and a couple of buzzwords. He didn't understand that the work matters, that people matter, and that when you step on the wrong ones for long enough, they stop warning you. They just move on. By the third month, we were turning down clients. Not because we were overwhelmed, but because I made a promise to myself and to Monica and Ryan that we wouldn't recreate the mess we left behind. No 80-hour weeks, no overpromising, no top-down chaos. We would do what we said we'd do, nothing more, nothing less, and we'd sleep at night knowing no one was getting left holding the bag. I got a call from a senior VP at my old company one afternoon. I almost didn't answer. I thought maybe it was about legal threats or some sad attempt at a cease and desist. But it wasn't. He wanted to talk about options. He was vague, professional, and very polite, but the desperation was there. Kevin was losing key accounts, internal morale was plummeting, and someone higher up had started asking questions like, who actually delivered the Hallister project? The truth was starting to leak, slow and steady, the way truth always does when no one's left willing to keep the lie propped up. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw it in his face. I just said, I'm happy to talk as an external consultant. That was it. No demands, no threats, just a polite reminder that I didn't burn the bridge. They had, and I wasn't about to be the one begging for planks to put it back together. Kevin, as far as I know, still had his title at that point. But it didn't mean much. Titles are like trophies from a rigged game. They look shiny from a distance, but up close, you start to see the cracks. His emails were still going out, his calendar was still full, but the calls weren't coming in the way they used to. The excitement was gone. The sparkle was fading. And he knew it. That's the part that hits the hardest when you build your success on someone else's work. When things go south, you don't know how to fix it, because you never learned how it worked to begin with. You can't rebuild what you never truly built. You can't win back trust you never actually earned. And me? I was finally starting to enjoy my mornings. No badge scans, no pointless sync meetings, no watching someone else get applause for the work I bled for. Just clear-eyed, honest work with people who gave a damn. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, because the shoe had already dropped, and it had landed squarely on Kevin Lang's neck. There's a very specific kind of silence that fills a room when a man realizes he's finally out of clever words. I imagine that's what it sounded like in Kevin Lang's office the morning he found out that the board had scheduled an emergency review of his entire client portfolio. I wasn't in the room, of course. I had long since removed myself from the circus and built something far more honest. But the phone call I got from a former colleague painted a picture so vivid I could practically see it. Apparently, someone upstairs had started connecting the dots between the exodus of clients and the rising pattern of vague excuses coming out of Kevin's mouth. It only took one bad quarter, one missed milestone, and one particularly blunt client, the Hallister team no less, to finally say what everyone else had been thinking for months. We're not getting what we paid for. Kevin had built his whole persona on upward motion. As long as he was climbing, no one really looked at where his feet were landing. But when the climb stopped and the pressure turned inward, the cracks became too big to ignore. He had promised results, but the results had followed me out the door. He had promised leadership, but the people who once filled the seats under him were now answering to me. He had pitched vision, but it turned out vision without execution is just a pitch. And even the best spin loses its power when the room goes cold. Now, I never planned on bringing Kevin down. That wasn't the point. When I walked out of that building with a box of my things and the dignity they didn't even try to take from me, I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for space to breathe, to recover, to rebuild. But the thing about people like Kevin is they don't stop at taking credit. They don't stop at pushing you out of your own work. They rewrite the narrative so thoroughly that you start to question your own memory. And after a while, if you don't stand up and show the truth, the lie becomes permanent. I had saved everything. Every version of every proposal, every email with time-stamped edits, every meeting agenda where I was listed as the point of contact, every slide deck that Kevin had quietly lifted from our shared folders and rebranded under his name. I didn't save them because I was planning some grand takedown. I saved them because I knew how this story goes. I had seen it happen to better men than me. Men who gave too much for too long, only to be erased with a single line in a restructuring memo. I wasn't about to let my legacy, or my work, disappear into someone else's promotion. So when the call came, not from Kevin of course, but from someone far above him, someone whose name I hadn't heard in years, I didn't answer with smugness or anger. I answered with the calm professionalism they used to expect from me, before they decided I was too seasoned to innovate and too steady to notice the walls closing in. The voice on the line was respectful, almost apologetic. They wanted to talk, not officially, just off the record, about what had really happened in the lead-up to the Hallister contract, and whether I'd be willing to shed some light on the operational gaps they were now discovering. I told them I had documentation. I didn't say much more than that. I let the pause on the other end do the talking. They asked if I could send a summary. I said I'd consider it. Then I hung up and stared out the window of my home office, a small, warm room with good lighting and no one breathing down my neck, and tried to decide if it was worth it. Not because I doubted whether I was right, but because I had already moved on. And sometimes letting the ship sink without your help is the more powerful move. But then I remembered the email. It was an internal thread from 9 months ago, buried in a shared drive folder Kevin must have assumed no one had access to. In it, Kevin had laid out his plan to consolidate visibility under a single name and ensure that external attribution aligns with internal leadership. It wasn't malicious in tone. It was cold, strategic, written like a quarterly roadmap bullet point. My name was mentioned only once, in parentheses, next to the words, Initial Draft Ownership. Consider Sunset Strategy. I had screenshotted it the day it came through, not because I was shocked, but because I knew what was coming. That email, more than anything else, told the real story, not just of stolen credit, but of a man who believed he could manipulate outcomes without ever understanding the human cost. I didn't send the screenshot, not right away. I waited. I waited until another client reached out, not one who had worked with me directly, but one who had heard about me through someone else, who said they were tired of the runaround and just wanted to work with someone who could give them straight answers and deliver results without the theater. That was when I knew Kevin's narrative was breaking. It didn't need me to push. It was collapsing under its own weight. Eventually, I forwarded the documentation. Clean, unedited, professional. No commentary, no passive aggression, just the facts. The person on the other end didn't thank me. They didn't have to. The silence that followed was enough. Last I heard, Kevin had been transitioned into a strategic advisory role, which in corporate speak means they put him in a corner with no real authority until he finds another job or takes the hint. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I didn't even mark the day on the calendar. What mattered more was what came after. The clients we helped, the team we built, the trust we earned not by pitching it, but by living it. I still don't know if what I did counts as revenge. I didn't destroy him. I didn't take him down in flames. I simply told the truth at the right time to the right people and let the truth do what it always does when it's given room to breathe. If Kevin ever looks back and wonders when it all started to fall apart, he might blame the clients or the team or even bad timing. But the truth is, it started the moment he decided someone else's work was easier to steal than to earn. And me? I'm still working, still building, still waking up without a pit in my stomach, knowing the only ladder I'm climbing now is the one I built with my own hands. Maybe that's not flashy. Maybe that doesn't come with a corner office or a title that makes people nod at conferences. But it comes with peace. It comes with pride. And it comes with the satisfaction of knowing that while Kevin was busy managing optics, I was quietly building something real, something he can never take.